That was the instant the air in the room seemed to freeze, and not because of a scientific discovery. It was because of her, because of just 3 words that came from her lips, clear, firm, and absolutely unshakable. I can save him. First, only Dr. Elias turned to her, and soon the others followed. 10 renowned specialists from all over Europe, men with decades of experience in neurology and intensive care. And there was Clara Mendes, a young woman wearing a gray cleaning apron, with a dust cloth in her left hand and an unwavering gaze. She stood on the threshold of the suite on the 2nd floor of the Alarcon mansion. Nothing in her appearance conveyed authority, but at that moment, she possessed something no one else had, the flame of hope. Victor Alarcon, a 42-year-old man, lay motionless in bed. A digital security giant whose software was the backbone of almost all major European banks. Real-time threat detection, zero-trust systems, advanced firewalls against phishing. A man who protected millions from cyber attacks and who, now, was completely defenseless. His body inert, his skin pale, his breathing maintained by machines. Clara felt her own heart beating strongly, a rhythm that, although not loud, was perceptible. She knew exactly what was coming. The disapproving looks, the rejection, the laughter disguised by furrowed brows. "Miss, this is a medical meeting." Dr. Elias's voice was calm, but permeated with a cutting coldness. He did not utter his real thoughts, that she was out of place, that her role was merely to clean. No, never speak. Clara took a decisive step into the room. She felt the firm floor beneath her feet. Her voice was quiet, perhaps even too serene. "I am a doctor." A heavy silence fell. A slight rustle when Dr. Silva dropped his pen. An almost inaudible breath from Dr. Costa. And then a short, dry laugh from Elias. "And yet you're carrying a cleaning bucket." Clara raised her chin. "I studied at the Federal University of Aurora. I graduated 3 months ago. No contacts, no resources. I sent dozens of resumes, no opportunities. So I work here while continuing my studies." Donna Alice, the housekeeper, materialized behind her. The crease between her eyebrows trembled with indignation. "Clara, please, this is not the time. Leave." But Clara advanced. Now she was at the foot of the bed. She looked at Victor, not as a legend in the tech world, but as a human being imprisoned in his own body. He presented symptoms that simply don't fit. I observed his movements, his eye reflexes, his reactions to sounds. This is not consistent with classical neurological degeneration. I believe it's autoimmune encephalitis, a rare form with antibodies against GABA receptors. The doctors exchanged glances. The terms she used didn't seem memorized from a book. They came from experience, from nights poring over studies while others slept, from furtive moments in the corridor secretly reading Victor's medical records. Dr. Silva leaned forward. "What if you're wrong?" "Then I will leave immediately. But if I am right, we could lose him because no one wanted to listen." Sergio Ramos burst into the room. His voice cut through the silence like a sharp blade. "What's going on here? Who authorized her to speak?" He wore his suit like armor, his eyes narrow and calculating. Clara knew him, Victor's right-hand man, responsible for managing millions, deciding contracts, and now deciding her job. "You're fired." Donna Alice nodded, but Clara did not back down. She remained by the bed, her fingertips on the cold metal rail. "If I leave now, he dies." The sentence was not a shout, but it resonated. In the minds of those men who considered themselves infallible, in the room that only knew technique and control. For an instant, no one looked at the monitors, only at her. Dr. Silva was the only one still staring at her when the others had already returned to their notes, as if they wanted to erase what had just happened. Clara felt his gaze on her. It wasn't hostile. It was a gaze that sought, that evaluated. Then a slight nod. No words, just a silent signal. Come. Victor's office, which normally overflowed with designer lamps, tech magazines, and futuristic models of firewalls and network protection systems, had been transformed into an improvised medical center. The walls were lined with X-rays and EEG reports. A giant monitor displayed the latest blood tests in endless tables. Clara sat on the edge of the long table, her hands clasped tightly, while Dr. Elias, arms crossed, observed her from the other side. Sergio Ramos entered and slowly closed the door behind him. The air in the room was dense. A heavy silence filled the space. Dr. Silva resumed his words, addressing Clara. Autoimmune encephalitis with anti-GABA antibodies. Explain why you believe this is the cause. Clara began to speak without hesitation. Her voice was low but crystal clear. She presented not hypotheses but concrete observations, the fruits of the hours she had spent silently by Victor's bedside. How his pupils trembled gently with certain sounds. How his eyelids blinked when the air conditioning was turned on. How his left foot curled when someone stepped heavily on the floor. All in minute detail, yet consistently. She cited similar case studies in the US, where young patients were initially diagnosed with psychological instability and later saved by specific antibody tests. Everything fit. The symptoms, the rapid progression, the failure to respond to antivirals. And then she named the antibody no one had tested, anti-GABA-B. Rare, almost never included in standard panels, and deadly when ignored. Dr. Elias scoffed. Cases like that are just curiosities in medical literature. Do you really want to claim that a multi-morbid 42-year-old man with this profile, he gestured in disbelief, is suddenly suffering from something so rare just because you observed symptoms while cleaning the floor? Clara did not look away. Her voice did not waver. I know how this sounds, but I documented everything, every observation, every reflex. If I'm wrong, I will have wasted your time. If I'm right, it's his only chance. She handed Silva a handwritten protocol, a bound notepad with crumpled pages and a coffee stain on the edge. It was science forged by necessity, by the purest humanity. Sergio Ramos leaned into Silva and whispered something Clara couldn't understand, probably about responsibility, authority, or protocols, things that always seemed more important than the life of the man in the bed next door. Silva examined the notes, slowly leafed through them, asked for specific reaction times. Clara answered without needing to think. To acoustic stimuli, especially voices, he reacts on average with a slight tremor after 1.2 seconds. I measured it several times. A dense silence took over. No one spoke, not even Elias. Finally, Silva put down the pad. Let's collect blood. We'll test for anti-GABA starting today. Elias quietly protested. Silva interrupted him. We've tried everything else. If she's wrong, we lose nothing. If she's right, we gain time. Ramos remained skeptical. She's not an officially hired doctor. Silva nodded, remaining calm. But perhaps she's exactly what he needs now. When the door closed behind her, Clara felt her chest vibrate, not from pride, but from shame, fear, and that tiny thread of hope that could be extinguished at any moment. She returned to the suite. Almost complete silence, interrupted only by the constant beep of the machines. Victor remained as before. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. Clara sat in an armchair, placed the pad on her knees, and resumed observing him. His face was hollowed, the skin under his eyes pale, as if even the light avoided him. She slowly rose, approached the bed, and leaned over. "Victor," she whispered, "if you can hear me, please give me a sign." Nothing, just the hum of the machines.
But then, an almost imperceptible spasm. The little finger of his right hand moved, once. She held her breath, thinking it was imagination, a reflex, but it happened again. This time, a slight pressure against her skin. She felt it. "You're still there," she whispered, a lump in her throat. "I knew it." Clara remained by his side for long minutes, her hand in his. Without a medical title, without any formal authority, just one person who wouldn't give up on another. Victor's finger still under hers. That slight, small, almost timid tremor had made the world around them stop. "Victor, if you really hear me, squeeze one more time," she said, fixing her eyes on his hand, every fiber of her body tense. And then it happened. Slowly, hesitantly, but unequivocally, his fingers curled slightly around hers. It wasn't a reflex, nor an accident. It was a silent scream from a body that had been silent for too long. The door opened without a sound. Dr. Silva entered, followed by Dr. Costa and Elias. They saw the two of them, Clara kneeling, Victor's hand in hers. She didn't get up. She wanted them to see. "He squeezed," she said softly. Silva approached, looked at the monitors, then Victor's face. "Mr. Alarcon, if you can hear us, squeeze again." A few seconds passed. The silence was almost painful. Then his fingers moved again, a little stronger, for longer.
Dr. Costa took a step back, eyes wide. "It can't be a coincidence," he murmured. Elias snorted. "Spontaneous muscle spasms, we know them. It's not conscious movement." But his voice no longer sounded so confident. Silva leaned closer, speaking slowly. "If he repeatedly responds to speech stimuli, it's a motor response, possibly even conscious." Clara felt her heart pound. Tears welled up, and she held them back. She took a deep breath and finally stood up, reluctantly letting go of Victor's hand. Silva was very close now, examining his pupillary reactions. "It's not imagination. The response is stronger than yesterday. The reflex arc works, and there's synaptic activity. It fits the hypothesis." Elias nervously flipped through papers, as if notes could change reality. Costa went to the table, looking for the latest EEG. Clara stood motionless in the middle, like a shadow that had suddenly become visible. No one questioned her, but no one ignored her anymore. "I want the remaining samples analyzed immediately," Silva said. "Priority for GABA testing. The labs are overwhelmed. Results won't be back until tomorrow afternoon," Elias frowned. "Then tomorrow will be a long day," Silva assented. As they left, Clara stayed a little longer. She carefully covered Victor's legs with a blanket and moved some loose cables aside. "I'll be back tomorrow and we'll continue, okay?" His eyes remained closed, but she knew he had heard. This time, she knew. In the quiet of the mansion, Clara returned to her small ground floor room. Despite her exhaustion, her mind buzzed with the observations and notes she'd made in her pad, which now seemed like a chaotic map of hope. She tried to rest, but thoughts of Victor, his hand, the pressure, the doctor's gazes, the doubt in Elias's eyes, kept her alert. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes, seeking a few minutes of respite. The pad slipped from her hand to the floor. It wasn't the alarm clock that woke her, but soft knocks on the door. Almost 6 o'clock. Opening it a crack, she saw Victor Alarcon, her large eyes marked by worry. "Excuse me, are you Clara?" Clara nodded. Sophia moved forward slowly, holding a crumpled photo of Victor laughing. "I wanted to see you yesterday, but I didn't know what to say. The housekeeper said you were with Dad. Is it true he squeezed your hand?" Clara looked into Sophia's eyes, full of fear and hope, and nodded. "Yes," he reacted. Sophia sat by the bed, hugging her knees, holding the photo like an amulet. The mansion was silent. Clara opened the blinds, allowing the morning light to touch Victor's face. Sophia, quiet for a while, asked, What if he doesn't wake up? The voice wasn't a child's, but someone who knew the pain of gradual loss. Clara didn't have a ready answer. "I don't know," she said, honestly and softly, "but I believe he wants to, that he's fighting. Otherwise, he wouldn't have squeezed." Sophia twirled the photo in her hands. "He used to make my coffee every morning, even after spending the night working on firewalls?" Clara smiled faintly. Systems that protected banks and companies from digital attacks. An invincible man in the digital world, now trapped in his own body. "Why do you do this?" Sophia suddenly asked. "You didn't have to. No one would blame you if you just cleaned." Clara closed her eyes. She was exhausted, but her defenses were breaking down. "I studied medicine in Aurora on a scholarship. I was the best in my class. But after graduating, nothing. No hospital called me. I took this job out of financial necessity. I thought it would be for a short time. But then I saw him every day. I started reading his medical records at night. I felt something wasn't right, and at some point I couldn't just clean the windows pretending I didn't see." Sophia said nothing for a while. She placed the photo on the small table and looked at Clara, serious. "You're braver than everyone else here." Clara shook her head. "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did," Sophia retorted. "You could have protected yourself like the others, but you chose to believe that your knowledge could change something. That's courage." There was a knock at the door. This time without hesitation. 2 quick taps and the door opened. Dr. Costa appeared, disheveled hair, a coffee stain on his lab coat, an expression between excitement and disbelief. "You need to come now. The first results are in." Clara jumped up. Her heart raced. Sophia followed her without asking. They ran down the corridor, past the large windows, through the oil painting hall to the office door. Dr. Silva was already bent over the reports. As they entered, he turned slowly. He held the lab results in his hands. "The GABA antibody is positive." Clara held her breath. For a moment, everything in her went quiet. Not pride, nor triumph, just simple relief. It was true. She hadn't saved him yet, but she had found the way. "The values are not extremely high, but unequivocal. It matches the symptoms. We have to start therapy today." Silva nodded. "We will start immunotherapy, corticosteroids, and intravenous immunoglobulin. If necessary, plasmapheresis." Clara knew what that meant. The fight was starting now. "What does this mean? Is he going to be okay?" Sophia asked. "I don't know," Clara replied honestly, "but now we have a chance." Silva looked at Clara with recognition, no longer evaluation. "Your observation was decisive." "Don't tell me," Clara interrupted, quietly. "Tell him when he wakes up." Sergio Ramos was the last to enter. Tense face, controlled movements. He didn't say a word as he stood beside Elias, who stared at the papers as if he could rewrite them by will. Clara, with hands clasped and heart still racing, stood apart. She knew she was right, but now that it was on paper, it didn't feel like a victory. It was confirmation, late and yet at the right time. "The antibodies are present," Silva repeated, breaking the last thread of skepticism. "It's unequivocal, levels above the threshold. It's a typical and treatable autoimmune encephalitis." Costa nodded and glanced at Clara. There was something there, not pity, but respect. Elias put down the report and clasped his hands. "I excluded this possibility because the symptoms didn't follow the classic course," he said harshly. "But I was wrong." It wasn't a heartfelt apology, but a record of error. Clara said nothing. She knew what that small acknowledgement meant. For her, the truth was enough. Silva pushed the papers aside. "We are starting the first infusion tonight. High doses of corticosteroid and immunoglobulin. Then plasmapheresis in 2 days. Adjusted plan." Sergio Ramos looked up. "Who is taking over medical direction?" "I am," Silva replied curtly. "And I want Miss Mendes involved." "What?" Elias exploded. "She has no contract, no authorization." Clara looked up, calm. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I just want to monitor. I know his patterns. I observed every change daily. It wasn't a plea, it was an offer. Sophia, until then in the background, came forward with a surprisingly firm voice. If she leaves, I leave too. Without Clara, no one would have recognized what really happened to my father. None of you. Only she saw her when everyone else had given up. I want her to stay. Something shifted at that moment. Hierarchy, distance, uncertainty receded. Silva nodded slightly. Costa looked at Elias, who opened his mouth and closed it again. Ramos was silent, a sufficient answer. No one officially welcomed Clara. No hand was extended. But when Silva handed her the therapeutic protocol, it was clear that she was now part of the team. The following hours were a flow of movement, orders, infusion preparations, monitoring. Victor remained still, but brain activity was no longer flat. Small oscillations, first responses to the medications, a thread of hope in the monitor's curves. Clara monitored every change, made notes, answered Sophia's questions patiently. As night fell, the corridors were empty, the house calmer. Through the window, the garden with lights reflected in the lake could be seen. Clara sat on the windowsill with a cup of warm tea, the protocol on her lap. Victor slept, or rather rested. His body fought, and somewhere deep inside, his spirit also fought. She didn't think about her journey there, the unanswered applications, the cleaning products that still cracked her skin. She just thought that this man, who had lived in a world of software, firewalls, and digital invulnerability, was now threatened by something invisible, and it was she who deciphered the code. Sophia entered softly, barefoot with a blanket over her shoulders. She sat beside her in silence. Then she said, "I think you didn't just save my father, you saved me, because you showed that it's worth fighting even when no one sees." Clara couldn't answer. She just placed her hand over hers, warm and light. Victor breathed calmly, and outside, the wind passed through the trees as if finally letting something go. In the following days, something changed, not abruptly nor with great fanfare. They were tiny movements, fleeting moments, almost imperceptible and yet unmistakable for someone like Clara, who counted every second. The monitor showed the first reactions, minimal changes in eye muscles, subtle movements in the fingers. Sometimes, Victor would open his eyes for seconds, but he did open them. Clara was always there when it happened. She took turns with the other doctors, stayed beyond her shift, forgot meals, barely slept. At night, she studied articles, compared cases. During the day, she recorded every detail. Her body was tired, but her mind was awake. Something within her knew that this moment was not a coincidence, that she needed to accompany it and not just clinically. Sophia came every afternoon. She talked with her father, read to him, played old songs. The doctor said it was important to offer familiar stimuli. Clara believed it was more than that. Sophia's voice anchored him. Sometimes, the three of them would stay in the room, Clara at the table, Sophia by the bedside. Few words, simple proximity was enough. One of those afternoons, with the light filtered by the curtain and the room warm, Sophia put down the book and looked at Clara. "You know he likes you." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" "I see how he reacts when you're around, how his face changes. It's different." Clara smiled briefly and said nothing. She didn't want to admit how many times she had thought the same, how many times she had wondered if her presence was more than purely clinical. "You like him too," Sophia insisted, with the simplicity of an unquestionable truth. Clara didn't answer. She adjusted the infusion, noted down values. But inside, Sophia's voice echoed like a resonance between two sighs. On the third day of therapy, Victor responded more. He turned his head when someone spoke. He kept his eyes open longer. Clara held his hand and spoke calmly, asking simple questions, always the same reaction. A small spasm, a slow blink. It was as if consciousness was emerging from a dense darkness, groping, insecure, yet determined. Dr. Silva stopped by more often and nodded, satisfied with the progress. "Clear signs of improvement. If he continues like this, he'll soon try his first words," he said. Clara only believed it when it happened. In the late afternoon, the first yellow leaves were falling. Autumn arrived discreetly. Clara was by the bed, as always, with Victor's hand in hers, while Sophia read an old letter from her mother. Almost peace. Suddenly, his lips moved, barely visible at first, then clearer. A hoarse, dry, brittle sound. Clara leaned in, her hand on his chest, as if she needed to confirm it was real. Clara. The word was barely audible, but it existed. His mouth had formed it. His gaze was on her. For a fraction of a second, everything around them disappeared. Sophia stopped reading, eyes wide. Clara's heart pounded, like a promise too long awaited. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm with you." He tried to say something. His voice didn't come out, but his gaze held hers. Something between them moved at that instant. A boundary that had contained them slowly dissolved. It didn't disappear, but softened. Sophia looked from one to the other, fell silent. She kissed her father's forehead and left the room. Clara remained seated, her hand still in his, fingers trembling. She didn't know what that name meant, but she knew it was more than a plea for help. It was memory, trust, perhaps a beginning. She only got up when he fell asleep. In the room, she took her first hot shower in days. She saw her reflection, pale, exhausted, but in her eyes something new, not a sparkle, but life. She sat at the desk, opened her notepad, and wrote only, "He spoke." The light in the conference room was too cold for that early autumn morning. The tall windows brought little warmth, although the shy sun was rising over the mansion's hedges. Clara stood to the side, invisible to many, but fully present. She held a tablet with his values, pulse, saturation, blood pressure, all within normal limits. For now. Victor sat at the head of the long oak table, upright in a dark gray suit. His voice calmer than before, a deeper tone that commanded respect without demanding it. Before him, 5 directors, security consultants, financial strategists, project managers, men and women who saw him every day and who now looked at him with a mixture of admiration and uncertainty. "We need to rethink our zero-trust architecture at the protocol level," he said, displaying a graph, "especially in multi-client banking solutions with the cloud. No system should trust by default. Verify is the new defense." Clara observed him. His hands weren't trembling. He spoke fluently, remembered everything: enterprise protection, phishing defense, real-time detection algorithms. His gaze was alert, but she knew the exhaustion that would come hours later. She was ready, every second. Sophia, a few rows back, discreet and proud, hands in her lap and shoulders straight. Her eyes shone when her father spoke. "In recent months, we have protected 14 million new customer records. Our encryption protocols are 22% faster than the previous generation." He paused and looked at Clara. "But what good is all this knowledge if the human behind it falls?" The silence was heavy. He slowly stood up, placed his hands on the table. "I wouldn't be here today if someone hadn't seen what others ignored. I want to introduce someone. She's no longer part-time. She's not just my doctor. She is the reason I breathe, think, and speak. Her name is Clara Mendes." A murmur ran through the room. Clara's face warmed. She didn't want to be the center of attention, but she couldn't back down either. Victor extended his hand. She slowly advanced and placed hers, cold skin against the firmness of his hand. "She brought me back when even I had given up," he said. "And before you ask, no, she doesn't have an official title here yet, but that doesn't mean she deserves any less." Sergio Ramos, standing by the coffee maker, remained impassive. His cold gaze and slightly furrowed brow revealed a silent resistance. Clara noticed him, feeling the tension almost palpable in his silence. After the presentation, the room emptied. Some approached Victor, patting him on the shoulder with respect, and nodded at Clara. Others maintained a professional distance. Clara, feeling a little out of place in that universe of numbers and strategies, knew that, in some way, she now belonged. Victor sank into his chair as soon as the door closed, leaving only Sophia, Clara, and Ramos. "It was more exhausting than I imagined," Victor confessed softly. Clara approached, checking the tablet. "Your vitals are stable, but it would be good to rest." "Just a few more minutes," he murmured. "I needed this. Not for the company, but for myself. I needed to know if I was still me." "And am I?" he asked Sophia, alternating his gaze between her and Clara. "I am, but different." Ramos intervened. "Victor, the presentation was strong, but we need to discuss the next steps and her role." He cast a meaningful glance at Clara. "Later," Victor cut in. "Not today." Ramos nodded, incredulous, and left. Clara helped Victor to stand. His shoulders trembled slightly, but he refused support. "I'm glad you were here," he said in a low voice. "Me too," Clara replied. They left together. The hall light reflected softly on the glass. Sophia walked ahead, light as a feather. Victor and Clara followed behind, their steps calm, almost in sync. Outside, an autumn leaf fell slowly, as if time had also learned to be gentler. In the upper corridor, the scent of wood polish hung in the air. The afternoon sun filtered through the old windows, illuminating portraits of past generations. Clara stood at the office door, her fingers resting on the arm of a chair, seeking a point of support. Victor sat at the desk, his gaze fixed on the clean, formal paper in front of him, with his single signature. "You no longer need medical care," he said, without looking at her. "Your work here is done. It's time." Clara nodded, without reply or hesitation. Her voice remained calm. "Understood." He didn't hand her the document. He simply left it on the table. She picked it up, folded it without looking, and returned to the corridor. Her footsteps echoed on the soft carpet. Sophia was at the foot of the stairs, and, seeing the paper in Clara's hands, narrowed her eyes. "What is that?" Clara replied, attempting a forced smile. "It's over." Sophia stared at her, then turned and ran up the stairs. She opened her father's door without knocking. "What are you doing?" Her voice louder and clearer than usual. Victor raised his head, blinking, surprised by the interruption. "It was necessary. Clinically, I no longer need her. But you want to get rid of her anyway." Sophia approached, stopping in front of him. "Tell the truth, Dad. You're scared. Scared to admit that you need someone, that you can feel something for someone." Victor fell silent, his gaze drifting to the papers. "I'm not ready," he murmured. Sophia let out a dry laugh. "Since when does life wait for us to be ready?" Meanwhile, Clara reached the ground floor. Sergio Ramos awaited her, holding a second copy of the termination. "Formalities," he said, with that voice that masked feelings under logic. "Only your signature is missing here." She looked at him, at the paper. Her hand didn't tremble, but a tightness in her chest made her feel a sudden emptiness. The moment the tip of the pen touched the paper, quick but determined steps echoed. Victor emerged in the corridor, without his jacket, without his briefcase, with the expression of someone who had been silent for too long. In one hand, the document she had left on the table, the other empty. No masks, no pretexts. He stopped before her and watched her for long seconds. Then he raised the sheet and tore it in half, slowly, with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet of the room. "I can't let you go." Clara looked up, the torn paper falling from her fingers. For an instant, the entire mansion seemed to hold its breath. Sergio took a step back. Sophia, at the top of the stairs, watched everything in silence. "You awakened something in me that I had buried deeply," Victor said, his voice clear and firm. "Since my wife's death, I lived in emptiness. I functioned, built, protected, all digital, nothing real. And then you came, and suddenly I started to feel again." Clara tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Her lips moved soundlessly. Only her eyes responded, wide, soft, and frightened by the truth revealing itself. "I thought if you stayed, I'd lose control. But what if that's exactly the way back?" He took half a step, hesitated, and raised his hand, asking permission to touch her. Clara nodded, almost imperceptibly. When his fingers touched hers, all doubt vanished. It wasn't a grand moment, with no passionate kiss or applause, just two people looking at each other, knowing their paths could no longer diverge. Sophia slowly came down and stopped at the railing, her face calm, like a silent witness to something good that had happened. Ramos left the room without another word. They stood there for a while, his hand over hers, her eyes on his. No more steps, no words. Everything had already been said. In their gazes, in the fear overcome, in the courage to surrender. Victor slowly released her hand, only to place it on her back the next instant. "It took me a long time," he whispered, "but now I know what I want." Clara smiled almost imperceptibly. "And I know, at last, where I can stay." The next morning, the mansion was quieter. No tense conversations in the hallways, no hurried typing, just the birds singing in the garden. The rustling of leaves drifted in through the open windows. Victor and Clara sat on the wooden bench under the chestnut tree he had planted as a child. The sun was gentle, the light warm and soft. Beside them, a gray binder with a newly created logo, Alarcon Foundation for Rare Neuroimmune Diseases and Promotion of Medical Opportunities. "I want you to run this foundation," Victor said calmly, "not as a thank you, but because you know what it's like to be forgotten, and because you never stopped fighting." Clara looked at the documents: support programs for young doctors without resources, research into rare conditions, exchange programs with universities, everything she had never had. Now it would be real, through her. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said honestly, "but I know I won't run away anymore." Victor looked at her for a long time, then slowly leaned in until their foreheads almost touched. The kiss was silent, no spectacle, a promise to build something new from what they had survived. Later, Sophia found them still on the bench, feet in the grass, the binder between them. She approached, saw their faces, the soft glow in Clara's eyes, the deep, rare smile on her father's. "You two look different," she said. Clara didn't answer. She reached out her hand to Sophia, and in that gesture there was more family than words could express. In the following days, the house, once filled with medical records and alarms, began to fill with plans. The foundation gained a small office in the West Wing, and Clara assembled her team: 2 young doctors, a social worker, an IT specialist from Victor's old company. They worked on calls for proposals, networks, organized the first seminars on rare autoimmune diseases. The atmosphere was calm, focused, no prestige, just purpose. Sergio Ramos observed everything from a distance. He said nothing more about her presence, nor did he object. Perhaps he had understood that certain things were bigger than his organizational chart. Or perhaps he knew that the man he had seen as his boss for years was now loyal to someone else. Victor left operational management, but remained as a strategic advisor. His office remained empty. On the desk, a single object: his torn resignation letter framed in glass. One afternoon, with the mansion bathed in golden sunlight and the garden whispering in the wind, Clara and Victor walked side by side on the gravel path between lavender beds. They hardly spoke, here and there a phrase, a smile, a memory. As they passed the old bench, he sat down again and pulled her close. "Remember when you told me to listen?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I listened from the very first time." She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "And I knew you would come back, not just to life, but to yourself." Dusk fell over the trees. Birds flew low. The air smelled of earth and a new beginning. In the distance, a light flickered in the foundation's office. There, Sophia was writing a pamphlet about hope. Her gaze went to the window for an instant, where 2 silhouettes slowly disappeared into the garden, step by step, side by side. Clara had nothing left to prove, neither to herself nor to the world. She was no longer the one cleaning hallways and dreaming of rooms where she was never allowed to enter. She had found her place, her story, and perhaps, finally, a home.